In the 3rd century, a scribe in Alexandria held a pen above the first page of Genesis. The Hebrew scroll before him began with the letter Bet. Not Aleph, the first letter of the alphabet, but Bet, the second. Bereshit. In the beginning. The scroll's first word opened with the second letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and every rabbi knew this mattered. But the scribe was translating into Greek, and Greek had no Aleph. It had Alpha. And so he wrote, Anarchy. And something irreversible began. The Hebrew alphabet opens with Aleph, a silent letter, a breath, an absence that carries presence. It appears in the name of God, Elohim. It threads through every holy word in Torah. When the 70 Jewish scholars gathered in Alexandria to translate the Hebrew Bible into Greek for a Hellenized world, they faced a problem older than theology itself. How do you carry silence across languages? How do you translate breath? They chose Alpha, the first letter of the Greek alphabet. Loud, voiced, definite. And with that choice, the Septuagint began to speak differently. Not wrong. Not corrupt. Just different. In ways that would echo through every Christian text written afterward. Origen, writing in Contra Celsum 3 centuries later, knew this. He spent years comparing the Hebrew text to the Greek Septuagint, and he saw the gaps. He notes that the Jewish scholars of his time rejected the Septuagint translation, claiming it had departed from the Hebrew original in significant ways. But Origen also defended it, arguing that the differences served a purpose, that Greek readers needed something they could pronounce, something that made sense in their alphabet, their worldview, their philosophy. The Septuagint translators were not careless. They were caught between two worlds. The Hebrew Aleph is not just a letter. It is a theological statement. Breath before word. Silence before sound. The Kabbalists would later teach that Aleph contains all possible sounds, that it is the letter of divine potential, of everything that could be said but is not yet spoken. You cannot pronounce Aleph. You can only breathe it. But Greek philosophy required something else. The logos, the word, needed to be articulable, definite, rational. Alpha could be spoken. It could begin an argument. It could start a sentence that Plato would recognize. And so the first word of the Greek Genesis begins with Alpha, and the first word of the Gospel of John, also written in Greek, mirrors it. Anarchy en ho logos. In the beginning was the Word. Both texts now opening with the same sound in Greek, a parallel impossible in the original Hebrew. Bruce Metzger, in the text of the New Testament, traces how the Septuagint became the Bible for the early church. Most of the New Testament authors quoted from the Septuagint, not from Hebrew manuscripts. When Paul writes, when Matthew compiles his genealogy, when the author of Hebrews builds his theological arguments, they are working from the Greek translation. The Christianity that spread across the Roman Empire was reading Genesis and Isaiah and the Psalms with Alpha where Aleph once stood. They were reading a text whose first sounds had shifted. Whose divine name, Elohim, was now Theos, a Greek philosophical term used for Zeus, for abstract divinity, for the unmoved mover. This is not a story of deception. It is a story of translation doing what translation always does. Every act of translation is also an act of interpretation. The Septuagint translators knew they were building a bridge between two worlds, and bridges change both sides. When Philo of Alexandria read Genesis in Greek, he interpreted it through Platonic philosophy, finding in the Logos a cosmic principle that joined Jewish monotheism to Greek metaphysics. When the Church Fathers read the Septuagint, they found prophecies of Christ that are harder to see in the Hebrew. The famous Isaiah 7 verse 14 verse, "A virgin shall conceive" in the Septuagint, but "a young woman" in the Hebrew. One word choice, and a theological divide opens. By the time Jerome translates the Bible into Latin in the 4th century, the question is urgent. Does he translate from the Greek Septuagint, which the Church has used for centuries, or from the Hebrew original, which the Jews still read? Jerome chooses Hebrew. And immediately, he is accused of Judaizing, of betraying the Christian tradition, of undermining the prophecies that point to Christ. Augustine himself warns Jerome, if you change the text Christians have trusted, you risk shattering the faith. But the text had already changed. It changed the moment Aleph became Alpha. It changed again when Greek philosophical vocabulary replaced Hebrew poetic ambiguity. It changed each time a scribe copied a manuscript and made a choice: this word or that, this spelling or that, this interpretation or that. Metzger documents thousands of textual variants in the New Testament manuscripts alone. Not because scribes were careless, but because they were human. Because they were translating, copying, interpreting, trying to preserve something sacred while the language itself shifted beneath them. The Masoretes, the Jewish scribes who standardized the Hebrew text centuries later, counted every letter. They noted every unusual spelling, every rare word, every silent aleph. They built a fortress of precision around the text. But the Christian world was already reading in Greek, then Latin, then a dozen European languages. Already reading a Bible that opened with Alpha. Already singing hymns and writing theology from a text that had crossed a linguistic border and come out different on the other side. And here is what remains: the original scribe's dilemma. You sit before a text in one language, and you must render it in another. You must choose between fidelity to sound or fidelity to sense. Between what the letter means and what the letter is. Between the breath of Aleph and the voice of Alpha. And whichever you choose, you will change something. Whichever you choose, you will create a text that someone, centuries later, will call the Word of God, never knowing it already passed through human hands, human choices, human uncertainty. Is there a version of the text that has not been translated?